I think most people know this story and who have studied the subject know that Adolf Hitler didn't kill himself in a bunker in Berlin as the Red Army closed in. I think that's, we all know that was a fabricated story, or if you watch this show, you probably understand that. Hitler actually fled Germany weeks before that using a group of underground tunnels that led to an airstrip. And that airstrip was flown. He was flown from Berlin out. It took submarines, or multiple submarines that were used, U-boats that were then sent to Argentina. In other words, Hitler lived for nearly 2 decades more in Argentina, along with vast numbers of the Third Reich. Well, now Argentinian President Javier Milei has just ordered the release of all remaining documents on all of those Nazis who fled Germany and moved to Argentina after World War II. Basically, it was almost like a second base of operations in Argentina. If you're not familiar with that, like basically the Third Reich operated out of Argentina and Germany. And many of them, including Adolf Hitler, lived in Argentina well after 1945. Most people know that Hitler lived out his days in Bariloche, Argentina, until he died there in the mid-1960s. Yes, you can read the CIA documents about this. The FBI documents also about sightings of Hitler in this area. They knew about it. Of course they knew about it. It was largely facilitated, I think it's safe to say, by the United States and its allies. Operation Paperclip, anybody? Quid pro quo?
Also, if you look into this, the skull that is held in Russia that was supposedly the remains of Adolf Hitler with a bullet wound in it is female.
Yeah.
So when you look for proof that Hitler did, in fact, kill himself in the bunker, you are going to find a lot of dead ends.
Yeah. And all you need to read, you can read a great book on this called The Gray Wolf. It's a great book. There's many books written about this now. But yeah, the skull, the fragments, they ran the DNA tests on it. And the Soviets allowed them to do this testing. And even Stalin openly talked about that Hitler lived, that he was not there. So Stalin even knew about it. It's widely known in Argentina, by the way. Well known that Hitler sired 2 children while he lived in Argentina after the war. 2 girls. Wouldn't that be something to learn where Hitler's children are today? Like Hitler's descendants? That'd be interesting. Maybe we'll learn that in those documents as well. But we'll be watching this story. I'm fascinated. It seems like there's an open era of transparency right now. You might be wondering like about the Epstein files. Our friend of the show, Kyle Seraphin, just a few minutes ago dropped a bombshell that he has confirmation from 2 agents who are actively working on the task force inside right now of the DOJ. They have 16 terabytes of data that they're going through right now on these Epstein files, hundreds of child victims. So there's like all sorts of hoops and hurdles they have to jump over on all of this, but they're actively working on this, like a task force that's been assigned to deep dive all of the records of Jeffrey Epstein. So what's amazing to me is that during the Biden administration, they were sitting on 16 terabytes of information and files and child victims that they did nothing about. They just sat on this information and did nothing until President Trump comes in. So I think there's like this era of transparency I'm hoping that we're seeing. Anyway, we'll be following this story.
I think the chat is like, I didn't know any of this. That's because you didn't marry Clayton Morris and we're not subjected to copious amounts of documentaries about
That's right.
this.
In fact, we reached out to Tim Kennedy, who was on the show. There's a great History Channel show called Hunting Hitler, which looked into a lot of this. But Tim Kennedy, who was a part of that group, we've invited Tim to come on the show. So hopefully he will tomorrow. We'd love to have Tim come on to talk more about this because this is a big story. I think most people, if you like go to Grok or if you go to Google's AI, they'll be like, oh, that's been debunked. No, it hasn't. There's actually copious evidence that Hitler never was in Berlin when the Red Army came, and that, yes, he did live out his days in Argentina, and it was all well known by the intelligence agencies. So anyway, look it up.
It's pretty well bunked at this point, not debunked.
It is bunked. It's not a debunked. It's not a bunker.
Another point for conspiracy theorists. It's been a good year.
Larry, we'll get you out of here on this. And I don't know if you have any knowledge of this at all, but yesterday we reported here what Javier Milei, the head of Argentina, of course, is now sort of following a lot of moves on transparency there to release these Nazi documents in Argentina. All of the Nazis that moved to Argentina had set up a base of operations there during World War II. It was almost like another version of Germany in a lot of ways. The Third Reich had set up a major base of operations in Misiones and Bariloche and multiple locations in Argentina. It's widely reported that Hitler survived, did not shoot himself, I don't think anyone really believes that. I certainly don't. And the evidence supports that he went to Argentina and lived out his days into the 1960s. So these documents that Argentina is about to release, what are you hoping you'll see? Is there anything there that stands out to you that you're looking at as a historian?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, that's having been involved with way too many subjects over the decades, I suppose. Yeah, very familiar with the so-called Ratlines that took Nazis of all types, a lot of SS, but also a lot of scientists into Argentina. And I mean, amazingly, you find things like Argentina starting its own fusion nuclear program with Nazi scientists that had been working on atomic research in Germany. But the other thing you find is that the CIA had convinced themselves that a great number of these former Nazis from the intelligence community, from the SS, not just the scientists. We tend to think that they just brought the rocket scientist over, but they didn't. They brought a lot of intelligence people, but they didn't bring them directly from Europe. They kind of enabled them getting to Argentina, and then they recruited them from Argentina into the U.S. And if you really want the full story of what evolved with the intelligence network and to some extent why the intelligence network became so obsessed with communists operating, immediately prior to the end of the war, a lot of that influence came from these Nazis who, of course, had been fighting communism as much as anything else. And
right.
They had a major influence inside the American intelligence community. It would be great to see exactly how those ties evolved. We know they're there, but again, the devil is always in the details. Who and when. Timing is especially critical.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would like more information about Operation Paperclip and how many of the Nazis held real positions of power inside the United States. Americans might be shocked to learn that. I hope we learn some of that in these documents. Larry, great to see you. The book is called The Oswald Puzzle. I know you're knee-deep in documents right now going through all of this. I hope you'll come back on the show with more revelations that we can talk about here on Redacted. Thank you so much, Larry.
Would love to. Thanks for having me.